Do you remember Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade? You have the villain Donovan going in and he's trying to find which cup out of all of them is the actual Holy Grail. He's going in with the idea that is embodying something that he covets, something that is priceless to him, something that is rich, the cup of the King of Kings, and he goes in and he pulls out a bejeweled golden cup.
He chose poorly.
Then you have Indy come in with a little bit more knowledge and a little more critical thinking, and he says to himself, he wasn't this King of Kings yet, he was a carpenter, it wouldn't have been this bejeweled thing, and he goes and he chooses a plain cup.
You have chosen wisely.
We're starting to get there, but for more of an idea of what I think about how output relates to the sound of a pickup, why don't you think about you want the perfect cup of coffee. You know that your perfect cup of coffee is a dark roast with a little cinnamon in it or something. And I give you a table with hundreds of cups of coffee on it. All different sizes, but looking at it, it's undiscernible. You don't know which one is the right cup of coffee for you. But you know that the last time you tasted your perfect cup of coffee, that cup was exactly 8 ounces. So you go through all of these cups of coffee and you find the one that is 8 ounces. What you end up with is a cup of Folgers coffee. Now, is that necessarily bad? No. Some people really dig that. That would be their favorite cup of coffee, but it's not yours. But all you were going off of was the size, the amount of coffee, and not everything else that went into that cup. That is how I feel about output. It is a terrible way to look at and to measure what your guitar's pickup is going to sound like. So DCR, resistance, output, all the same thing is honestly the 90% of us are probably using that to pick at our pickups, and it's the thing that most pickup manufacturers will put up on their site. In the past, that included me. Resistance is just a measurement of how many winds are on your coil. So when we're building a pickup, we have these are bobbins. Humbuckers will have 2, single coils will have 1. It is a measurement of how many winds are on that bobbin to make up that coil in relation to the dimensions of the bobbin and what wire is being used. It represents how easily your signal flows through that coil. The thicker the wire, the easier it is for the signal to flow, right? So if you think about a tunnel, if I gave you a huge tunnel to run through, gave you a minute to run to the end of that tunnel, and there were no obstructions in it, you'd do it pretty easily. And if I asked you to do the same thing in a tunnel that was tiny and you had to get down on your elbows and your knees and crawl through it, it would be harder. We can wind pickups with different gauges of wire. The higher the gauge, the thinner the wire is. Typically, pickups are wound with somewhere in between 42 and 44 gauge wire. You could go thicker or you could go thinner. What you need to understand is that the same amount of wire using different gauges will have a different output, a different DCR. So if I were to wind a coil with a foot of wire in both 42 and 44 gauge, it would be easier for the signal to pass through the thicker 42 gauge wire, giving it a lower output. And then vice versa, the one with 44 gauge wire would have a higher output or a higher resistance. Output is a really bad word in this case. I don't like to use it. DCR is the one that we should be using, or resistance. Now, this isn't just a resistor. Pickup is an inductor. So you can measure resistance, capacitance, and inductance. To put the other two very simply, capacitance affects how highs are lost from the coil. You have probably heard about it in relation to guitar cables. A lot of boutique companies will talk about their low capacitance guitar cables. Essentially, the lower the capacitance, the less highs are lost. Inductance is a measurement based on those other two factors of how efficient your pickup is working. How well is this working as a magnetic inductor? Typically, the more winds you have, the higher the inductance. The higher the inductance, the darker the pickup tends to be and the louder it tends to be. All of this, though, brings us to the resonant peak, or the resonant frequency, which is the most important factor of how a pickup will sound. It really is a very easy concept to wrap your head around. There's visual ways to show it, and it's a shame it isn't used more than resistance is. So if we're speaking of efficiency of an inductor, your guitar's pickups are not reproducing the frequencies of your strings with equal efficacy. There are factors that go into making the pickup and just the nature of electronics, which makes that true, but we don't really need to get into all of that science right now. We just need to know that that is the case. The resonant peak, or the resonant frequency, or the Q factor as some people call it, is where your pickup is most efficient. It produces its loudest tones, and you can kind of think that it represents the baseline of your pickup, its midpoint. There are ramp ups and drop offs on either side of that peak frequency. When I was designing the Hecate pickup, which is our new pickup, I'm axing all of our old pickups because I started to think about it in terms of these measurements. Before, I was really going off of what I had heard when I was restoring or repairing or creating things, and other anecdotal evidence and myths perpetuated out there of what combinations I could put between different wires. And I started experimenting with bobbin heights when I started making my own parts instead of using the off-the-shelf components, which tend to be the same, and really building things with my ear through my rig, which is all well and good. That is how we choose things. It's gotten me very far. I've built some great pickups on the back of that method. With resonant peak frequency, it is something that we can measure, and I've done just that. And it's kind of changed the way I think about pickups and designing them. So I built this exciter coil, which is pretty much just a guitar pickup. And on the other end, we've got an audio jack. And I can put the different frequencies that our guitar will go through and plot on a graph exactly how my pickup will respond to those frequencies. When I did it with some of my old pickups, I was pleasantly surprised that some of the things that I was claiming and thought were absolutely true, particularly with my Lich Bell pickup. Other ones that I had more recently designed and liked the sound of in my rig were not necessarily exactly what I wanted it to be. You can take all of these points as it puts it through in the different frequencies and put it on something called a Bode plot. I believe it's Bode. It's spelled B-O-D-E, but I believe it's Bode. And it just kind of shows you how your pickups respond to each frequency, and I'll put that up here. The peak of a P90, which when I put it up on the screen is over here, it's quite low. A typical humbucker is a little bit higher, and then as you get higher and higher, you go up towards like tele pickups and strap pickups and single coils. It's measured in hertz. The lower the hertz of the peak, the darker the pickup is going to be, and the higher the brighter. It's on either end of this that we get those buzzwords of mud and bright, okay, or ice pick. We can eliminate those being buzzwords by understanding what they mean. If it's muddy, the frequencies that pickup is accentuating are kind of unusable tones that we don't really want to hear. It's not letting you cut through the mix. It's might sound good okay on its own, but as soon as you put it in context with everybody else, you start to lose definition. And on the other side, you've got ice pickiness, where it's trying to accentuate those frequencies that are not pleasing to our ears. The resonant peak is the sum of all of these things. When I was designing the Hecate pickup, where I really wanted this to sit, I had made some tongue-in-cheek jokes before about my past pickups, like the Lich Bell pickup. When I was selling them, I was selling metalheads things that they actually didn't want, because my pickups really don't fit the profile of what is usually marketed towards metalheads. The Lich Bell pickup in particular was a very vintage style pickup with a very weak magnet, an Alnico 3 magnet, in comparison to some of the hotter, over-wound ceramic and Alnico 8 really high, strong magnets. But what that really did was, when we looked at the resonant peak frequency of this, it's a slightly higher than a typical humbucker. Not high enough for my tastes as I started to do this, and that's where we landed on with the Hecate pickup. So the Hecate pickup, if you look at these two peaks on either side here, the one that is right next to the humbucker, but a little bit higher on the hertz factor, that is the Hecate pickup in full humbucking mode. It starts to land right between a Strat and a humbucker. And then the other one is where a typical Strat pickup would land, but that's actually the Hecate pickup coil split. So seeing that and plotting it against other things, I can see that my tonal characteristics of that single coil are actually where a true single coil would be, and not just cutting the resistance factor on a humbucker. When you do that with something in a vintage humbucker, the winds are so low on that you're not really getting enough inductance to make it nice and loud and give it some character. And this is also representative of having the entire guitar's load in line with the pickup. You can do this with an unloaded pickup, which means just taking the pickup straight and then doing the tests with the frequencies, In doing that, a pickup like a Strat coil may actually come up at 8 or 9 on the scale here. What I do is I make sure that I either put this in a guitar or use capacitors and resistors to mimic the pots within the guitar and the capacitance of the cable being used to plug it into your rig. So this plot that I have right here is extremely representative of how that's going to come out of your guitar into your rig. It gives you a very, very good idea of what that is going to sound like. So with the Hecate pickup, you have something that lands right between a Strat and a humbucker. The output on this is 13K, and if I were to give you this pickup based on 13K and you had another 13K humbucker using something like Alnico 5 pickups and was tightly packed in with 42 gauge wire to get that 13K, it's going to sound dramatically different than what this sounds like. This is bright and clear, the note articulation is great, and so if you're picking it based on that output, it's really not going to give you what you want. And so I think you could probably see by now, after all of this, that this really only matters if you're comparing apples to apples. If you're interested in more, you can join us here. Follow me on Instagram, Widdershins_guitars. I'm very active on there. I'm trying to get YouTube to be more of a focus of what I do here. I'm very busy. This whole operation is me. We do guitar repairs, services, restorations, custom pedals, custom pickups. I teach courses here, so you can come take a setup course, you can take a fuzz pedal building course, or a full kit build course where we build a kit back to front with me guiding you along the way to actually make those kits into really, really nice instruments. Hopefully this was helpful. I'm going to post this on my site above all the pickups, so it's always there for people to have a look at and learn about before they select.